Takes just a second to connect. Hi out there. I'm Josh from the Bethlehem Area Public Library. Connect. We will be presenting in just a moment. So sit tight. Our panelists are all here, and we'll begin the presentation in just a second.
So where'd Josh go? So how many brochures should we have printed?
Great question.
Peter, the meeting is streaming now. You know that.
I know that, but this is small talk about the project.
The world is hearing this.
Do you want to sit here silently staring at a screen with people watching you, or would you rather actually be doing something worthwhile?
Well, the budget for the brochures is what? 50?
All right, everybody, we're live.
It's on YouTube.
The beginning of the presentation is just a lot of like awkward staring at the camera, but we'll get started in just a minute, or we can start right now, Mary, if you're ready.
Sure, I'm happy to start right now. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here this evening for our panel titled Save Our Swifts by Saving Their Urban Habitat, Changing Methods of Construction and Their Impact on Chimney Swifts. I'm Mary Foltz. I'm the director of the Southside Initiative and associate professor of English at Lehigh University. I'm really, truly thrilled to be with you tonight as the moderator for this panel. Southside Initiative focuses on creating civic spaces for civic engagement with pressing issues in our community. And we are so happy to partner with a number of organizations and community leaders that are calling on our community in Bethlehem to think about how development might benefit both humans and wildlife in our region. And before introducing our panel, I want to just take a minute to express gratitude for our sponsors for tonight's speakers. Funding for tonight was provided by the Lehigh Valley Engaged Humanities Consortium. Thank you so much to this consortium for providing support for these important civic conversations. I also want to thank the Bethlehem Area Public Library for hosting this event, and Josh Burke in particular. Programmers at the Bethlehem Area Public Library have been wonderfully successful in producing events like this one that allow residents in our community to come together in safe spaces to promote democratic engagement with civic life. Thank you so much, Bethlehem Area Public Library, for all that you do, especially during COVID, to bring residents together to talk about issues that matter to our community. I also want to thank the Lehigh Valley Audubon Society for their work on the Save Our Swifts project, especially Scott Burnett, who's here with us tonight, and Peter Sanger for their leadership on this project. Our local Audubon Society is leading the way in helping residents think about how we might better support birds in our region, thank you to this organization for their leadership and all of their members for being trailblazers in our community. And I also want to say thank you to Artifact Inc. founder Christine Usler for her efforts on the Save Our Swift project. Christine is here with us tonight. And generally, I want to thank her for being a true leader in Bethlehem around historical preservation and sustainable development. And finally, I want to thank Jenny Gilrain, who's also here with us tonight. She is a visionary who gathered all of these organizations together and propelled us to imagine ways to support the Swifts in our region. Jenny is a little bit of magic, and I really am so grateful for all of her organizational leadership. So tonight's panel is a part of a series of 3 public conversations about the Swifts in Bethlehem and how we might better support them. The Save Our Swifts project began with curiosity about the Swifts as residents like Jenny Gilrain roamed the streets of the South Side and saw large numbers of them spiraling into a chimney of the Masonic Temple. Their beauty, the beauty of the Swifts, brought a sense of awe and a desire to learn more about their habitat and how urban chimneys support them. An interest in these resourceful birds who had found a way to survive in the wake of deforestation by depending on chimneys for their migration led residents to a commitment to preserving the chimneys upon which Swifts depend. For Jenny Gilrain and others, a desire to support the Swifts led to conversations with the developer John Noble and his family as they prepared to demolish the Masonic Temple and build a new structure in Bethlehem. Jenny and John Noble and others, a number of leaders in community organizations, began to imagine ways that his Masonic Temple project might preserve the chimney upon which thousands of Swifts depend in their migration. And so with the support of our panelists and others on the Save Our Swifts team, Noble devised a plan to tear down the temple, but to leave the chimney intact. Today, if you drive by the temple site, you can see how John Noble and his development team left the chimney standing so that the Swifts can utilize it upon their migratory return from Central and South America. The team currently, for the Save Our Swifts project team, is currently raising funds for this specific project. And we really hope that you'll consider donating on our GoFundMe page. It is really urgent that we raise funds to save this chimney, as it's really quite costly to keep this structure intact. And the GoFundMe page is going to be pasted, Josh, if you'd be willing, in the comment section on the YouTube page. Now, while the Save Our Swift team has focused on the Masonic Temple redevelopment project, we are also thinking more broadly about how to garner civic support and action to support this declining species. With funding from the Lehigh Valley Engaged Humanities Consortium, we decided to offer these 3 panels that provide community members information about the Swifts and visions about how we might support them. So beyond public forums, the team supported a successful campaign to make the Swift the official bird of Bethlehem, and currently is working to foster civic development that takes the needs of birds into account. In short, we are hoping that civic development can go to the birds as well as human communities. So tonight, this is the central focus of our discussion. How can civic development be imagined in Bethlehem that benefits human inhabitants of the cities and the Swifts? And we really have wonderful panelists, which I'm going to introduce now. Christine Usler is an architect and founder of Artifact Inc. Christine, will you give a wave? Thank you. She is also a professor of practice at Lehigh University and a board member of the Pennsylvania Historic Preservation Society and the South Bethlehem Historical Society. Christine is going to speak with us tonight about the story of the changing form and function of chimney structures throughout Bethlehem's history. And following Christine's presentation, Scott Burnett will tell us about how the Swifts adapted to urban environments, and he's going to chart the connections between human history and natural history. Scott is the chairman of the Habitat Committee of the Lehigh Valley Audubon Society, and he has been involved in the Save Our Swifts project from its early days. And Scott, will you give a wave? Thank you. And finally, we have Peter Sanger here. He's also with the Lehigh Valley Audubon Society. He is the president of that society, and he is an ornithologist at Muhlenberg College's Center for Ornithology. Peter will conclude the presentation tonight, and he may jump in and with Scott while Scott is presenting. We are so grateful to have all of you here. And Jenny Gilrain, who I talked a little bit about at the beginning, is also here on this panel, and she might chime in as well in our conversation following these presentations. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Christine Usler for her presentation to kick off the panel.
Okay, thank you, Mary. I will, first just a comment in that this history is not unique to Bethlehem. So I have lots of examples of chimneys in Bethlehem, but the history of the form of chimneys is broader than Bethlehem. Let me share my screen. Where are you? There you are. All right, let's minimize this. I just want to also thank Joe Lula, who has helped put this presentation together for me and done a lot of the legwork. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the architecture of chimneys. As I said, it's broader than just Bethlehem. So in the background, you see one of Bethlehem's industrial chimneys. And let me get my, hang on a second, it's not working. There we go. Okay. So I'll start back in sort of colonial era. And here you see some of the early walk-in fireplaces, large fireplaces that were utilized for cooking. There was an abundance of wood available for energy, for fires to do the cooking, and chimneys were often quite unique elements on early buildings. And these fires for cooking clearly were fairly constant. You know, chimneys didn't get cold. They were used quite constantly. So as a habitat for chimney swifts, this wasn't the time for that. I wanted to point out a few things about the chimney you see on the right, and that is, you know, it's very large. It's to the outside of the building. They always are higher than your roof for safety reasons, so that the roof shingles don't catch on fire, and that you get a good draft. I've worked on buildings actually that had concrete, very rustic concrete floors in the attics because there were often roof fires with the sparks that came out of the chimneys. Before that, even the chimneys were not brick, but they're made of wood and clay. And the lower image here, you see a typical walk-in fireplace, a very rustic one. In the 1700s, you see a little bit more refinement of the fireplaces, and you can see how deep they are, how they really were walk-in fireplaces. And what you see in the image here is Bethlehem's Sun Inn. So as I said before, fires were kept going at all times of the year for cooking. Eventually, with wood supplies dwindling, American colonists needed a more efficient way to cook and keep their houses warm. So you start to see development in the construction of chimneys, and then eventually ranges and cooking. So one of the key figures in the development of chimneys is Count Rumford, who invented the Rumford Fireplace. And I have some drawings here on the right The first one shows the flue and chimney that was typical in the 1700s, early 1800s, and they were very large. This is a plan view. This is the section showing the flue that's dark, and you see it's pretty wide open. The chimney the draft is the important part here, and these sorts of chimneys that are sort of open chambers, the draft was not always very good, and sometimes you had a lot of smoky interiors. Rumford developed a shallower firebox, and you could see this one was actually drawn as a renovation of a walk-in fireplace. And you see they're much shallower. They have angled side walls to reflect heat into the buildings, so they're more efficient. And you also see that the flue itself gets necked down, and you see this bit of extra construction here necks down that flue and creates a smoke shelf. And he was very inventive and worked through the dynamics of smoke being drawn out of homes. So he was really very interesting. He goes on, and actually develops what is the forerunner of our ranges and stoves. But earlier in the 1700s, German settlers brought with them the 5-plate stove to Pennsylvania. And that's the grandparent to our ranges and stoves today. And of course, many of you know Ben Franklin, and he developed variations of this original stove, resulting in the Pennsylvania fireplace and the Franklin stove, and an image on the right. And then, as I said before, Count Rumford, he developed at a similar time frame with Ben Franklin, something that was more like a range. And what it might be a little hard to understand this drawing, but the top part of the drawing is a elevation view showing the area here that had in plan openings where you could sit pots in, and then you could have 3 separate fires going to develop the heat for cooking. This was a roaster, and this is the fireplace right here. And I think they also had a bake oven. So he had this very large masonry construction that had something that starts to look like a range. So shifting gears a little bit into the Industrial Revolution time period, we have a housing boom and a factory boom. Both factories and houses needed chimneys, and factory chimneys vented large boilers and other furnaces, and residential chimneys, of course, vented fireplaces and stoves and eventually heating systems. Many industrial chimneys were very large, like the one you see here on the right and the lower part of the slide. And this is a fascinating story here that was one of the projects just recently reviewed at the Pennsylvania Preservation Board. So this chimney that you see it was built in 1881, 204 feet tall, and it was the tallest chimney at its time in Philadelphia. It had 272,000 bricks in it to construct it. The interior flue was 6 feet wide, and they actually constructed it from the inside and had scaffolding lifts from inside to build it. And apparently the draft is so significant that if you were to drop a handkerchief at the bottom, it would take only 1 second to come out the top. The other really fun thing is that it was apparently quite an attraction. And when the chimney was completed, they allowed visitors to have a look at the chimney by sitting in an armchair that was hoisted by a steam engine up to the top. I just thought that was fantastic. So industrial chimneys that you see in Bethlehem, these are current. This is down at the far end of Bethlehem Steel's site, just past the casino. This one is at 601 East Broad Street, which is the former Laros Silk Mill, which is currently undergoing some renovations. This building, I don't have a full picture of it, but this building is a very large silk mill, was a silk mill, and the windows were all removed and glass block put in at one point, and the renovations will return this building to closer to its original appearance. It's going to be an incredible renovation, but this chimney remains and will still be there. And then if we look at the residential chimneys, now going back in time, the earliest chimneys of Bethlehem, you would see them on the Gemein House. This is from the back view. And these are very simple chimneys, but you'd see many of them. On the right, slide's a little bit distorted here, but this is the Nain Schober House, which was recently reconstructed and restored, and it has its own small chimney there. These are similar, very simple, functional chimneys. The Smithy, a reconstructed building just to the south of Hotel Bethlehem, and this one, which I'm not exactly sure which one it is. Joe took the photos for me, but I wanted it in to show you that it's been capped, if you can see my cursor, with concrete. So it's actually not functioning for birds or for anything. Some more really wonderful Bethlehem buildings. This is the Bell House. And the Bell House, again, simple chimneys, but each sort of set of apartments had their own fireplaces or stoves. So this one is actually in the Bell House. This was an apartment that we were involved with in renovations. And this is actually the, I'll say the fireplace. And the opening to it is on the side. I unfortunately don't have a picture of that. But the fire was not seen as something to look at. It was heating up this masonry mass that would radiate heat into the space. So this dates from the 1740s, I believe. Moving a little bit further along in time, early 19th century in Bethlehem, you have the Gundy House from 1810, and the typical end gable chimneys. And for fun, I put my own house in. I live in an 1802 stone house just north of Moravian College, and I have 2 end gable chimneys. I do have them capped. Scott will beat me up, and Peter. But there's a reason, and you can see in this wonderful heavy snowstorm, it keeps snow and water out. There's some really lovely chimneys in Bethlehem. I certainly don't have all of them, but often you'll see double chimneys, and this is in one of the early apothecaries, I think. And here's a double chimney that's actually got a sort of slot of space between, and then the top of the chimney joins those 2 separate flues. If you walk along Market Street, you see a lot of really great chimneys. This one, moving a little bit later in the century, is quite ornate, quite large. And the other thing to note is that it's at the eave end of the building. It's not on the gables. And you see they are much taller than the simple chimneys of the 18th century. But part of that is because they were at the eave end, to get proper draft, you need to be, the current code is any part of the roof 10 feet away, the chimney has to be 2 feet higher than that. So you see how tall these chimneys can need to be. This is a house down at the cemetery. I thought it'd be nice to look at the chimneys at Lehigh because they have some great chimneys. And this is the physics building on the left, has a number of chimneys, probably about 8. And the building that I love and spent many, many years teaching in until recently is Chandler Ullman Hall. And its chimneys are incredible. And you might ask, what were they? Why so many chimneys? This was originally the chemistry building, and those flues were used to ventilate the labs and the lab tables. So all the lab tables were properly vented. And this building is a National Register listed building for chemistry buildings. It was also a noted building at one of the World Fairs, I think in Paris. At Lehigh, we also do have an industrial stack at the Wilbur Powerhouse. And that is, as far as I know, not active. And I wonder if chimney swifts have found it. And Copay Hall is this wonderful architectural feature with a little gable roof on it, which I love. So just back to the technology of building chimneys and what their form is. With the coming of central heating and gas and electric cooking ranges, chimneys began to change in form. They weren't used constantly. And you start to see the development of chimney flue liners, which you see here. This is terracotta, late 19th century, early 20th. Flue dampers that closed off the air because the fireplaces weren't being used constantly. Cold air coming down or cooler air was not comfortable. And so you had a damper to keep that cold air coming down from coming into the home. Later in the 20th century, you see metal flue liners, and that's on the right, and a metal cap here with a screen around it. Not friends to the swifts. And but there are functional reasons for keeping water out, squirrels and other animals that are not desirable. So the question from me to Peter and Scott are, what can we do that allows the birds in and the squirrels out? Now, late 20th century, chimneys and currently chimneys really are, in a sense, obsolete or at best optional. Chimney flues to the roof are no longer needed with high efficiency furnaces and gas fireplaces. And so the diagram and the photo over here, this is a current sort of high efficiency furnace. It just gets vented out the wall. This, fondly known in the construction industry as a gas fireplace doghouse, is the fireplace with a simple vent out the back. Chimneys, though, generally are still constructed for wood burning fireplaces. I wanted to take you a little further, and this is to look at chimneys as high design architectural features. And these are, I have just 2 slides and 4 images of some unbelievable architecture for chimneys. And the 2 here are works from Edwin Lutyens, British architect of the late 19th century. Chimneys were a signature of his buildings. You see them rotated and twisted and multiple ones grouped together so that they become quite a focus on a building. And you see the delightful form here of the twisted chimney. And then the most unbelievable chimneys you will find in Spain. In the same time frame, what's hard to believe to me is this is 1880s. And these are Antonio Gaudí. And the chimneys are fantastical sculptural works of art that populate the roofs of his buildings. They are just hard to believe, these forms, and how they were created, how they were designed, how they were built is quite stunning. And then I'll just simply end with a picture of the Masonic Temple chimney that started all of this in a sense. And prior to this, I really had no knowledge or was not at all familiar with the chimney swift or with its needs to migrate from chimney to chimney on their way south or north. So thank you very much. And I look forward to questions.
Thank
So
you so much, Christine. So I just, for those of you watching us on the YouTube channel, if you have questions for Christine, you can go ahead and put them in the comment box, and Josh Berg is going to be monitoring that area for questions. So please give us some questions. We're going to take 10 minutes now to talk with Christine, and then Scott will offer his presentation. Josh, do we have any questions yet?
No, not yet. Other than for me. I was just curious. You mentioned that you taught at Lehigh. Are you from Bethlehem? I'm just curious if you're from the area or.
No, I'm not. I'm from the Philadelphia area, and grew up. Part of my time in Chestnut Hill and part on a farm in Chester County. Lived in a 1790s stone farmhouse, and I both experiences led probably to my interest in architecture and then interest in historic architecture in particular. I studied architecture in New York City. I studied, well, I should say, first I studied it at Lehigh. That's how I got to Bethlehem. And then was in New York, and then was asked to come back and work with one of my former professors. And he actually got me involved with teaching, and I've been teaching since 1984.
Thank you. I was just curious. Thank you.
Well, I think, Christine, you had a question for Scott and Peter about the capping. I mean, that was a part of your presentation. I'm just curious, Scott and Peter, if you had an answer for Christine or a way to engage with that question.
Yes and no. Christine showed some pictures of chimneys that were capped with a raised capstone sitting on corner pillars of the chimney. This may or may not be a way to allow the swifts to enter the chimney, even though you have a weather cap on the top. It would have to be raised significantly above the top level of the chimney in order to allow the swifts to maneuver in through that opening. 2 or 4 inches isn't going to do it. It would have to be substantially higher than that. Any kind of screening on the chimney that prevents like spark arresters or animal guards or anything like that are going to definitely prohibit the swifts from entering the chimney. And I'll talk about that a little bit more as I speak about swift conservation and what we can do to give the swifts a home in instances where building codes and stuff require those types of caps on chimneys.
And also, Scott, I'm seeing that sometimes now an open chamber chimney, like codes and even banks are requesting they have chimney liners put in, and often that's a metal liner, and that's not going to encourage the use of chimneys for the swifts.
No, the stainless steel or metal liners that they use are totally inadequate for swifts to perch on. I'll explain how they only perch vertically because of their anatomy, and they absolutely cannot grip onto the steel liners, and therefore can't fasten their nests to the side and or roost in such a construction.
I guess I have some questions if, if there's no other ones coming for me.
There are, not to cut you off, but there are. There's a bunch of questions in the chat for you. So is that okay if I jump in here?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The first question is just asking why some chimneys get painted, and if there's a reason or a negative as to not like why you shouldn't paint your chimneys, or if there's a positive to doing so.
Well, I didn't touch on the fact that chimneys are very vulnerable to weathering, because you have all sides are exposed to weather, and if you don't have a cap on it, you've got water coming down as well, and you've got the when water is saturating those bricks and it freezes, and then it thaws, and then it freezes again. You see that chimneys start to break apart very quickly. So that's another reason that people do put like a raised chimney stone or cap on earlier. But painting, some people will paint them thinking that is going to help keep the water out of the bricks. It doesn't actually work that way so much, but that's one reason people think of doing that.
And the one that will be here in Bethlehem, there's a question asking if that one will be not necessarily painted, but if it'll have an artistic element. I know we've seen some that have been really pretty neat looking architecturally, or have a mural on them or something. Are there plans to do anything like that?
With the Wilbur chimney?
Yes.
Yes, I don't know at this point. I don't know. I think that remains to be seen, and Jenny might know a little bit more, and maybe John will bring information to the table at some point on that.
And there's another question.
Oh, just FYI, John and Lynn Noble are in our audience.
Okay.
So I do not know what the plan is, but I'm guessing from what the last brief conversation I had with them, that they're going to try to kind of leave it, historic, not paint it. That's my guess from what they were saying last time I talked to them, but I don't know for sure. So if they want to type into the chat anything, they're welcome to answer that question. Thank you.
As far as the swifts are concerned, they don't care what the outside looks like. They're worried about the inside.
Yeah.
So best thing for them would be to just leave it raw masonry in the inside and not put any kind of liner or anything like that inside this old chimney.
So you already started to answer this other question, which was asking how the save chimney will be worked into the plan for the development, and also if there will be a space where you can view the swifts as part of the development, which I think we mentioned last time, as like someone else brought up, similar as to how neat that would be. So if you know, Christine, if that's part of the plan.
I don't know all the details yet, because this was a unforeseen change, and I'm thrilled that John is saving the chimney. We didn't think he could actually. It was so integrated into the architecture of the building that I wasn't sure he could actually sort of extract it, because it was the bricks were all kind of knitted together. So it's great that he was able to do this. This was not easy to do. I mean, everybody should know this was not easy, and did cost a lot of time and extra money to do it. But I'm absolutely thrilled that he did it.
I'd like to interject there that, and I haven't even approached John about this, but I think having a chimney swift camera looking down the chimney for nesting and roosting birds, one looking up at swirling birds coming in and migration to the cafe named the Swift Cafe, and promote this whole thing will be a great idea. But I mean, that's just my thoughts.
I'll share what little I know, again, just from brief conversations with John and Lynn, and it may be ever, I'm sure it's ever evolving and changing, but my understanding, and I'm a little vague on this, is that the event center, which will be built, and Christine, help me out here, there's going to be a one-story event center. I think the capacity is like 150 people. That's going to be maybe connected to the chimney or close to the chimney.
It, I believe, will be very close. I'm not sure if it's connected, but you know, the one-story new addition to the mansion will, you know, there'll be a lot of glass there, and you know, I think that, you know, this is probably going to become a feature of the development.
Yeah, and another thing he said, which was awesome, is that they want to put some educational material about the Swifts somewhere close to the chimney that people can view. And I'm just getting a text from John. I'm going to read it aloud. We are covering the non-brick areas with stucco and leaving the tan bricks exposed. We are not on the chat, but on the YouTube. So that's why he's texting me. Yeah. Okay.
Great.
Well, thank you so much. I want to make sure that we have time for Scott's presentation, and perhaps Peter will leap in at some point too. But if you have more questions for Christine, keep putting them in the chat, because we will have some time at the end to ask questions for Scott and Peter, and we can continue talking with Christine then. Christine, thank you so much. That was just wonderful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And now I will turn it over to Scott.
Just like to say hello to everyone that's tuned in tonight. What I'm going to try and educate you on is a little bit about the chimney swift itself, which may overlap what Peter spoke about in the last forum somewhat. And also the main topic I'll be speaking about is the conservation of the swift moving forward into the future, as we have ever-changing chimney constructions, and large chimneys, industrial chimneys, come down, they're demolished, and so forth. You know, this could mean the demise of the chimney swift as a species if this demolition and or capping of chimneys goes on indefinitely without providing the swifts an alternative nesting or roosting site. So we'll talk a little bit about that. I'm going to share my screen for some slides. Unfortunately, when I put them into my software, it rearranged everything. So I'm going to have to kind of blindly go through these. Here's the first one. Okay. This gives you just a quick look at what the chimney swift is all about. They're very small birds. They're about 5 or 6 inches long from head to tail, about 5 inches, 4 to 5 inches, I'd say. The wingspan is about 11 inches. They have these very long, curved, scimitar-like wings. They're very aerodynamic and acrobatic in flight. If you've seen them flying, they twitter around the skies. They look almost like a bat. And people often mistake them for bats, especially when they're using chimneys as a roosting site. They're very unique in their anatomy. I'll show you a little bit more close up. Their feet are adapted specifically to clinging to these vertical surfaces. And I'll show you a close up of the foot here in a minute. They cannot perch on twigs or on flat surfaces. So that means this little bird spends all of its life either hanging on these vertical masonry or stone or wood structures like this you see here, or in flight. So what happens is these birds at dawn emerge from the chimney, spend the entire day on the wing, flying around, catching flying insects that are their food source. And then in the evening, they'll come back and roost like this at the same spot in the vertical chambers that they've chosen as a roost. So these poor little guys, they're either flying around all day or they're perched. And I'll show you some nesting activity and all that good stuff too. Here's what we're talking about with these big industrial chimneys coming down. They're being demolished because they're showing their age, and they're no longer safe, some of them, so they're tearing them down. I thought this picture was funny. I included it because here in the lower right is the demolition company's family. And notice the little girl here running away from the demolition. They're not quite sure where that thing was going to fall, I guess. I thought that was kind of funny. Here's another type of swift that is found in the United States. It's the white-throated swift. It's only west of the Rockies. We have the chimney swift, which is only east of the Rockies. I'll show you their range map in a minute. Okay, here's what it looks like inside of a residential type chimney when you have swifts roosting and or jostling for position in the roost. They pack themselves in there quite tightly. You know, I'll show you some pictures of thousands of birds in one chimney. Residential chimneys during roosting time, they roost communally, which is in the fall as they're heading back to their South American wintering grounds. And that's the only time they'll roost communally. The rest of the year, they're kind of solitary or in pairs. They do hunt together in flocks, but they choose a specific chimney, and usually a nesting pair will claim that as its territory and defend it. So you might get one or two pairs nesting in a chimney like this, but no more. And it's in the fall when you see these large numbers of chimney swifts. This is another swift called the Vosges swift. It's a western swift. Looks very much like the chimney swift. Same habits, but it's found, again, west of the Rockies. We only have one type of swift east of the Rockies, and that's the chimney swift. All right, here's something that Christine spoke a little bit about. These terracotta flues were used prior to the modern construction techniques of like metal flues, et cetera. These are adequate for swift nesting and roosting because, as you can see, there are edges in here where the swifts can get their little claws into and or attach their twig nests to the sides here. If this was completely smooth, like a glazed pottery type of clay liner, that would be useless to the swifts. They need some kind of little rugosities in order to dig their claws in there and hang on. This would be adequate, but stone or brick chimney is much better for them. Here you see quite a large smokestack, or properly called a chimney, I guess, with several hundred swifts roosting in there. This is very common. They prefer these large industrial type chimneys found on factories, schools, churches, large chimneys, you know, anywhere from 2 to 10 feet square. That's where you'll find these large numbers of swifts roosting, and hence they're in the Masonic Lodge chimney in Bethlehem. Here's a swift nesting site that I monitor every year. This is in a 1740s era log cabin. This is in the Allentown Parks Department. This was built in the 1740s. It's a stone chimney with an open hearth at the bottom, and it has no capping at the top at all, not even a rain overhang. And every year we get one nest of swifts in this particular chimney, and then a few will roost in here in the fall. I don't know how long they've been nesting in there. As Christine said, during the early periods of these residential type chimneys, they burned the stoves constantly. You know, maybe in the 1800s sometime when that practice stopped, then the swifts would have moved in here and used it as a nesting site and roosting site. Here again is one of these cap chimneys that has a big stone slab at the top, and you can see it's raised from the raised above the surface of the chimney here, the top surface of the chimney on these pillars. This is probably 6 or 8 inches above the top of the chimney. I don't know if that's adequate for the swifts to get in there and maneuver or not. I've really never seen them myself personally go into a chimney that's capped like this, but it stands to reason that if the plate were high enough above the chimney, that the birds could maneuver in there. They're very acrobatic. When they're inside the chimneys, they can fly straight up and down in there, make turns, switch directions. They're really acrobatic and aeronautic. So they can pretty much move around at will in there. So that it would stand to reason that they can probably negotiate their way into something like this, especially if it was raised a little higher. But then you also reduce the efficacy of the cap by raising it up. So that's something that developers and conservationists will have to work out in the future. This gets into the conservation part of the swift problem. Historically, these birds, and it's kind of interesting, there's a sycamore tree in the back here, the background of this photo. Historically, these birds nested and roosted in large hollow trees, and sycamores especially, because they become brittle when they die and the tops snap off, which leaves an open vertical chamber that's enterable from the top of the tree and gives the swifts somewhere to perch deep down in that hollow and create their nesting and roosting edges in there. This was historically, where swifts were found. I'm sure they basically evolved with trees as their roosting and nesting sites. Then when Europeans arrived on the scene, they started cutting these forest trees down, especially the big hollow ones, because they were unsafe. They might fall on a house or a person. So these big hollow trees came down. Fortunately, this was right around the time when they also started building chimneys in homes and factories and stuff like that. And fortunately for the swifts were able to adapt from the vertical chambers in trees to the similar vertical chambers in our chimneys and smokestacks and things like that. They'll also nest in ductwork, anything that's a vertical surface that they can cling to, but mostly chimneys, hence their name. When we talk about the conservation of swifts, it's two-sided. The swift can either be saved in its current place of roost and nesting, such as an existing chimney, like is taking place at the Masonic Lodge in Bethlehem, or we can provide alternative roosting and nesting sites. And what you see here is what we call a chimney swift tower. It's an artificial chimney built specifically for nesting and roosting of chimney swifts. This is me up at the top here working on this tower. This is built in one of the Allentown parks. A chimney this size could hold 1,000 or more swifts. And these guys, are really beneficial to humans because they consume 1,000, maybe 2,000 flying insects a day. And these are insects that are pests to us. And swifts allow us to use less pesticides, which is always a good thing. The more of these that go up, less pressure there is on swifts to find existing old roosts that haven't been capped or torn down. If the chimney at the Masonic Lodge would have been raised, when those swifts migrate south from Canada or northern New England in fall, when they return to that specific chimney, which they use annually, and they remember that particular chimney, it's ingrained in their brain. That's one of their stops on their fall migration. If they show up there and that chimney's gone, we are not really sure what happens to all of those birds. They arrive in the thousands, and if they have no place to roost, it's totally possible that many of these birds will perish, especially if there's inclement weather at the time. We really just don't know what happens to all of them, but it's better to be on the safe side and provide them with these new roosting sites and or save existing roosts. Let's go on here. This is just some information about the swifts. I pretty much gave you that. This shows the summer range here in red of the chimney swift. It migrates down through Central America and across the Gulf of Mexico. It's a really good flyer. It can easily fly nonstop across the Gulf of Mexico. And here the blue area is where they winter in northwestern South America, a lot in the Amazon rainforest and along the coast here. Interestingly, we did not know where swifts wintered until just a few decades ago, when ornithologists were in the Amazon and they came across hunters wearing necklaces of bird bands. And when they traced those numbers off those bands, they found that they were from chimney swifts that had been banded in the United States. Okay, here's a close-up of the feet of the chimney swift. Here you can see an aluminum band. This bird has been banded. This is a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service band where we keep a database of all banded birds in North America. Notice the feet. These toes are very short compared to, like, if you think of like a chicken or something that has long toes with short claws on it. This bird has short toes with very long claws on it. And the claws are curled downward here at the end of the toe, and they can't be extended upward like that. Like a normal bird could flex its claw up and down. This bird is not really able to do that. So this is what impedes it from perching on branches and flat surfaces. It's evolved to just be a clinger on these vertical surfaces. These feet are like locked in that position. So it's what makes them rely on chimneys now as a home. There's a close-up of the face of the swift. Notice this large raised eyebrow here. It's like a visor. It helps the bird keep glare out of its eye as it's hunting these insects on the wing. Another close-up of the bird. Again, notice these scimitar-like wings, and the tail feathers wear off the edges of the tail feather and only leave the center shaft, giving these birds the nickname or the family name of bristletails. The swifts and swiftlets have all these stiff spines so they can use them as a kind of a resting point that their weight balances on while they cling with their claws. Flying swifts, usually in groups when they're hunting. Again, a swift in flight. The band. The bristle tail, again. Very good picture. This is a look-alike bird. This is a tree swallow. This is a distant relative of the swift, I guess. Peter, is that correct? Peter's not here. This is a bird that is very common nester in the area. It's a day flying bird.
Similar appearance, but not
shape.
related, because, as you know, swifts are related to hummingbirds more closely than swifts and swallows.
Right.
Or swallows, excuse me.
The swift again has a very twittering flight, like a bat, like this. Whereas the swallow has a more swooping, defined flight as it's hunting. Here's your typical big industrial chimney that these birds have evolved or adapted to, I should say, when all the big hollow trees were starting to go down and these were starting to get built. The birds adapted to this environment, this habitat. So big chimneys like this, I imagine this is probably 8 or 10 feet in diameter, will house thousands and thousands of swifts during migration like this. And they do this swirling flight around the top of the chimney. Whoops. The swirling flight around the top of the chimney like this. And they all circle in the same direction. At some chimneys, it's clockwise. At other chimneys, it's counterclockwise. Kind of depends on the nearby terrain, I believe, which way they choose to circle. And then at some point, this takes place at dusk, by the way. At some point, one bird will decide it's time to go in, and he drops straight down into the chimney, flies straight down into it, and kind of flutters back and forth on his wings to slow his descent, but it's basically a controlled free fall into the chimney, and then he flies to a spot on the side. And once the first one goes in, the rest follow. It's like you're looking at a vacuum cleaner sucking these things out of the sky. It's pretty amazing. If you've never seen it, I would highly recommend that you go out and search out a roosting site of these birds in the fall. Again, big brick smokestack with a few swifts that have begun to roost in there. This is probably earlier in the day when they haven't all gone in yet. Here's a square chimney, not very clear, but here's thousands of swifts in there. One of the biggest colonies in Pennsylvania is at Reading High School, and it's estimated that per night, 14,000 swifts will roost in their chimney, and that chimney is about 5 feet square. An interesting fact is that as the migration progresses, each night or each couple of nights, a different group of swifts moving south will occupy the chimney. The birds that were in there the previous day or days before continue moving south to their next chimney on the route. So over the course of a migration period, multiple groups of these swifts occupy the same chimney in succession. So if you have a chimney that holds 1,000 or 2,000 birds on one day, it might hold 1,000 or 1,500 on the next day, and so forth. So in a season of migration, you might have a chimney like the Masonic Lodge housing tens of thousands of swifts for their migration. So it's a very important roosting site, and they're all very important roosting sites because, you know, otherwise 10,000 or more birds might be displaced during a migration period. Again, swifts entering a masonry chimney. This happens right at dusk. And a group of swifts roosting in a circular large smokestack or chimney. Getting into the modern residential type chimneys, this is another example of what Christine spoke about, these screened caps that go on the top of the chimneys. The screening prevents animals and insects and stuff like that from getting down in the chimney. The cap keeps snow and rain out, which does, as Christine mentioned, eventually have an effect on the life of the chimney. Regarding that, people think that the swifts also could damage chimneys, and that's absolutely not true. Their little claws are no match for the masonry or the mortar, and they really do no damage to the chimney when they're in there. As far as their droppings in the bottom of the chimney, the only time we really find much dropping accumulation in the bottom of the chimneys is during the nesting period, and that's when the babies will defecate over the side of the nest and it falls to the bottom. The adults usually evacuate outside of the chimney, and during migration, they go into kind of a torpor or a deep sleep at night when they're roosting, and they don't seem to excrete waste at all while they're communally roosting at night. So we find very little amount of droppings in these roosting chimneys or even nesting chimneys. There's not much to be worried about as far as, you know, them messing up your hearth. And we have studied their droppings for pesticide contamination and different diseases and stuff like that. And I don't know of anybody that's published a paper that claims any harmful substances in their droppings harmful to humans. So they're pretty safe, pretty innocuous. Again, another type of cap chimney. And sometimes, you know, people will add these to their chimneys after their chimney's been open for years. So if they do that, this excludes the swifts when they return in the fall. Again, this is a metal flue, one of these new metal flues that they're using. These are, even if it's not capped here with this screen top, it's completely useless to the swifts because their little claws can't purchase anything on that smooth material. Another stainless steel flue, screening, swifts. This is an interesting photo. In the early 1900s, this woman here, her name is Althea Snyder. She was an ornithologist, an amateur ornithologist, and she built the first artificial chimney swift tower in the United States. And she built this structure around the outside of the tower here, and it had a spiral staircase up around the whole thing to the top, and it had viewing windows in the sides of the chimney where people could stop on the stairs and look at the birds inside the chimney. Really a kind of unique structure that she built there. I believe it's still standing. Again, this is the plight of these big chimneys nowadays. There's me building one of the towers. I think that's the end. I just wanted to show you something else quickly here. Here's the inside of her tower with the staircase. And this shows one of the viewing windows here to look inside the chimney. Maybe I don't have that slide in this batch. I was just going to show you the nest, the close-up of the nest, which I don't have in this group of slides. I'm sorry. The nest is attached by the saliva of the bird. The bird brings in one little twig at a time, coats it with saliva while it holds it with one foot and sticks it to the side of the chimney. And it takes this bird a long time to build a nest because each nest has approximately 265 twigs in it. And to gather these twigs, they have to do it on the wing. They cannot land on the ground and pick up a twig. They have to snap these little twigs off the tree in flight. So it's a pretty big deal for them to attach a nest. And the surfaces of these masonry chimneys is ideal because they have these ledges and mortar joints that allow them to do so. So the big thing for us nowadays is the conservation of these older chimneys, if possible, such as is happening at the Masonic Temple. John Noble is leading the way as a developer who's willing to help these birds. We hope to foster more of that through his efforts by spreading this educational material around, getting people involved and aware of what the swifts are, how beneficial they are, and how much they are part of our community. Bethlehem was an industrial powerhouse back in the Industrial Revolution, and it's a real stronghold for these birds. So it's a great place to showcase what can be done for the chimney swift. So that's about all I have for you. Josh, are you going to try and get some questions for me?
Yes, I will do that. I'll take them.
And I'm going to start with an excellent talk, Scott. That was really, really well done.
Yes, thank you.
Sure. I just winged it, you know. I don't really have a written script that I go by. I just like to talk.
Well, I know that, and you did a great job. So
I have a question. Well, Josh, I'm sorry, Peter.
no, I'm just going to razz Scott a little bit, saying, yeah, I didn't give him a 5-minute limit there. And no, he did a great job. I was really impressed.
I have a question for you, Scott. While Josh is looking at the chat, do you know where this this ornithologist woman who built the artificial chimney, where that is located?
It's in Ohio somewhere. I don't know the exact town. I could get that information real easily for you, Jenny. Yeah,
I'd be interested. And then a second question. I'm sorry. When they're you called it a free fall. I mean, I've watched it, right? But of course, it's I didn't have a slow motion camera. But when they're all actually going in the chimney in large numbers, it almost looks to me kind of like a leaf falling. Like
yes,
they're going feet first, right? They're not diving in.
right. They're not diving in. They start by diving down straight towards the chimney. And then once they get to the opening, they'll flatten out and spread their wings. And they do what we ornithologist types call whiffling. They'll rock back and forth like this and allow air to escape under each wing alternately. And that slows their fall down by but still allows some lift under their wings to keep them from dropping like a stone. It's called whiffling, and a lot of birds do that to control their altitude, to decrease their altitude.
Are there any videos that you know of that you could lead us to that have a slow-mo of, so you can actually see that, like what that looks like in slow motion?
I don't know of any specifically that I could like give you a link to right now, but I would just say Google something like chimney swifts entering a chimney, and you'll get tons of video hits on that.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of them, but I've never seen that. I'd be curious to see it in slow motion.
sure
But
you-
great, thank you.
sure you
I'll stop
can find it.
asking.
Scott, before Josh asks a question, could you stop sharing your screen so Christine
Oh,
can
yeah,
come
sure.
back on and we can
Sure.
see everyone in case there are some questions for Christine as well. And Josh, if you have a question, we're all ears.
Yes, there's one from the group here about building your own towers. And the question is, do swifts, are they more likely to go into a big tower like the one at the Masonic Temple? And if so, is there a reason why we typically build them smaller besides construction?
I'll tackle that one. You hear the adage, size matters, and the same is true with the swifts. The larger the chimney, the more attractive it is to them, the easier it is for them to find, the easier it is for them to enter. As far as roosting is concerned, the larger the chimney, the better. We build them the size we do because of convenience and cost. We could build them bigger, and we also are starting to build them, some of them out of masonry. But generally we build them out of wood to keep the costs down and make them easier to build for the everyday man. There is a book available that's excellent if anyone is considering ever building their own chimney. It's put out by chimneyswifts.org. It's a little paperback, about 40 pages maybe. It's about $14. I'd highly recommend purchasing that on their website if you're interested in conserving swifts in your area.
And I'll add into that the reason you build the smaller towers is that generally only one swift pair will build a nest in a tower. So roosting towers like the Masonic Temple will hold tens of thousands potentially. What we're building in general is for one nesting pair at a time, because they're very territorial when they're nesting. So it's just for one nesting pair.
And I would add to that, the towers that we've built in the Lehigh Valley and elsewhere, most of them have been readily adopted by the swifts. And we have nests in almost all of our towers that we've built annually.
Can I just ask a follow-up question, Josh, before you bring us a new one? How many have been built in the Lehigh Valley?
I've personally been involved in more than 20 that I've constructed or been part of, but you know, we've been working with several other Audubon societies in the southeastern Pennsylvania area. New Jersey Audubon has worked with us, so I really don't know how many have been built total. I don't have a figure for you.
Thank you.
Idea?
I have a question for
And
Chris.
out west, I'm sorry, Jenny.
No, go ahead, Peter.
I was just trying to get my mute. For some reason, my space bar doesn't unmute me tonight. And out west at the Audubon Society of Western Pennsylvania Audubon Society has built well over 100 in the Pittsburgh region. So these towers are going up all over the place in huge numbers. So it's a good thing and a good effort.
I have a question for Christine. That picture that you showed of the Laros silk mill,
Mhm.
I pass that, or I see it every day on my way to work, because I'm a 4th grade teacher at Freemansburg Elementary School. So I go over that bridge, you know, and I see it right behind the Wawa. And I've always wondered, I mean, it looks like a perfect tower for the Swifts, but what is the plan there? So they are gonna save it, and what are they, like, they're not gonna cap it, I hope. What do you know about that?
So the intent is not to take it down as far as I know. This whole world of chimney Swifts was so unknown to me, I never even thought to ask about, any details like this. So I do know the developer, and I think, I think he's not planning to do anything with it. So I will find out though for you. I think it's intended to stay, and I don't think they're planning to cap it.
So then a follow-up question for Scott and Peter would be, if the Swifts are not using it, seems like a great place for them.
And why not?
Yeah, like I'm wondering, not only why not, but like I've heard of that sometimes people will put a recording in an artificial tower to attract Swifts. Like, does that work?
I have not heard that, but if the birds aren't using the tower, I would say that there's something about it that makes it unsuitable for them. But let's confirm with a spring survey that they are or not moving or using that tower.
Yeah.
Because that's the whole thing about this project, because we don't really know where the Swifts are going. So we should document every place that they're using and save everyone that we can.
I would suggest and direct you to Wyncote Audubon has started a statewide registry of large known swift roosts or nesting sites. They generally consider a large roost 100 birds or more, and they're documenting all of these locations with GPS coordinates so that we can monitor them in the future. Like if a landowner decides he's going to tear down a building, we'll know that roost in that area is coming down, and perhaps we can build an alternate chimney there or convince the landowner to save the existing chimney. So if you're interested in reporting chimney swift roost sites, look up Wyncote Audubon. That's WYNCOTE, and they will have a link there to the Swift registry. And again, it's statewide, so it's a really great tool for us ornithologists to use to find out where the Swifts actually are. Because it's people like you and me out there, everyday people that are seeing these birds. For an ornithologist to go out and hunt down all these roost colonies and stuff is pretty impractical, because they're so scattered and they're so hard to observe in the roost. So citizen science is really important here.
And again, I'm sorry, go ahead, Mary.
I'll just add, because Peter had mentioned that's something that perhaps we should map. And just for our audience out there on YouTube, I just want to note that that's a conversation that the Save Our Swifts team is having. We're trying to recruit student interns that might create a map of where Swifts are roosting in Bethlehem, finding the larger sites at dusk in the spring, and creating that into a digital map that we might be able to share with the city of Bethlehem. I'm so glad, Scott, that you shared that information, that we could see those sites outside of Bethlehem. But this is a really important possible next step for this project, is to celebrate John Noble and Lynn Noble and their development project, and start to think about other structures in Bethlehem that we might map so that we could be aware of them, and think about as a community ways to continue to protect these chimneys that Swifts are depending upon. Josh, I want to make sure that we're getting our YouTube people questions as well. And I didn't want to cut off conversation, but if there's a question from our audience, that would be great to throw that in.
Yeah, there is one here about the roosting. And the question is, when they roost in groups as they migrate, how long do they stay in any one chimney? Is it just for a day or a week or a longer on their bigger trip?
It can be totally variable. It can be changed 100% one day, switch, or they can stay for a couple days building up reservoirs for energy. Depends on insects and how well they can resupply their energy for the migration. So it's a total changeover generally every day.
The other factor is weather too. I would think that on inclement days or nights, these birds would be less apt to migrate than if it were nice weather where they could fly, unhindered, as well as feed along their route. Insects aren't going to be flying around if it's raining out, so they would have a hard time feeding in their chimney to chimney daily route if it were inclement weather.
Yeah, the key is that these birds need fuel. It's like going to the gas station. So if they have a lot of insects and they're feeling healthy and strong, they can migrate. If they're not fully fueled, they're going to hang where they are until they get that much fuel to move to the next staging site.
I would also urge people that care about this type of initiative to try and limit the amount of pesticides you apply in your lawn and your garden and so forth. Because if these insects become infested with insecticides, the birds will eat them and perish. So, try and use as few insecticides, pesticides as possible.
Mary and everybody, I have a John Noble did text me an answer to a previous question, so I just want to read that. Sorry. We are connecting the chimney to the event center, and we will be including educational information in the lobby, and we will try to get live camera linked to our website. So, yeah, I guess the one-story event center will be connected to the chimney. So just, that's an earlier question, I guess.
And on that note, I would like the Lehigh Valley Audubon Society. I haven't gotten far enough on it today, but I'm hoping we can fund the live link camera to go to their building to promote the chimney swifts, and have one going into the chimney for nesting, which is probably going to be a crapshoot because you don't know where they're going to nest. But I think it'd be neat to have one for the fall migration, especially looking up to see the swirling tornado coming down. And I think they ought to name their cafe the Swift Cafe and
Awesome.
Swift dinners. And let's promote this whole thing. I mean, what the Noble family's done is incredible, in my opinion, even if the Swifts don't even come back. And I anticipate that there won't be any change in their patterns, meaning they're going to come back. I think this whole thing is so phenomenal. They need accolades. So it's a real good feel-good story. So love it.
I would just add, as far as where the birds nest in the chimneys, it's my experience in the towers that I've built that the birds will nest at the level of sunshine and shadow where they mix in the slightly dark area, but it's still enough light that they can see what they're doing with their chicks and so forth. Right in that area where sunlight and shadow meet is where they generally nest.
Well, I just want to say thank you to John Noble and Lynn Noble for texting in to be a part of the conversation. It's great that you're a part of the panel too. And I want to echo what Peter has said. I mean, I think this is such an exciting model of community engagement and support for development that is also thinking about, the swifts in our region, but we could also think about other wildlife in our region. And also participating in community dialogue about the kind of vision that we want for development in Bethlehem. I mean, I think also that deserves celebration, that John and Lynn would be texting in to be a part of this community conversation. I think it's just wonderful too. Thank you so much. for texting in. We're glad you're here.
Well, in all my years of being involved within the environment, I cannot, when Jenny first contacted me about this, I said, yeah, okay, I'll send Scott because he's expendable, and nobody's going to save a chimney for chimney swifts. And when Scott came back and said the developer is willing to do something, I'm like, are you kidding me? No, the Noble family really deserves a big applause. I mean, this is so unexpected. It's phenomenal.
It's almost unprecedented in our field, you know.
No, Scott, you said it right. It is unprecedented because
the nobles are conservation heroes in my book.
Scott, you're our habitat chair. Do you know any other place where we've been contacted to help save even a nest box where we've gotten this much cooperation?
The only place I can think of is the First Presbyterian Church on Center Street in Bethlehem.
But
they contacted us a while back, years ago, like a decade ago.
But they haven't done anything.
Well, they did. We did have a Boy Scout build a chimney swift tower on their property.
Right.
Didn't do anything with their existing chimney, which is still open and an active roost.
Right. But that was one roosting or nesting site to replace a major roosting site. Right. So, that's good. Yeah, that's good to know. But
that's the only other one in our area that I can think of where the owner or developer really reached out and, cared enough about the swifts to try and help them.
Most just bulldoze it down. So, no, the Nobles, come on.
Yeah.
This is phenomenal and unprecedented, in my opinion. So, very good.
Josh, we're getting close to the end, towards 8:30. Is there any last question out there on the chat for our panelists?
No, there was a question about that particular book that Scott mentioned. So I looked it up. I'm the librarian, so I found the book, and I told the folks in the chat, we'll make sure we get one for our collection so people can borrow it from the library and help spread the information on how to do that. So there was just a question about that book, and then there's hand clap emojis in the chat as well.
Audubon, a local Lehigh Valley Audubon chapter, is really involved in building these towers, these replacement chimneys for the swifts.
No, Scott is.
Well, it's something I took on a long time ago, and people can go to our website lvaudubon.org and contact either Peter or another one of our officers to get in touch with me. And if they're seriously interested in building a tower, I'll jump in and consult, and we'll get them a copy of the book and whatever else they need.
And I think we've modified that original design.
I have modified the design.
Yeah. Bigger is better.
Bigger is better.
Well, I want to thank all of our panelists for coming out tonight. Jenny, thank you so much for joining us. John and Lynn Noble, thanks for texting in. Josh Burke, thank you for being our moderator and bringing us questions from our audience.
You're welcome.
And I want to thank all of you for tuning in to the Bethlehem Area Public Library's YouTube channel. And there is another session coming up. I don't know, Jenny, do you want to talk about the third panel?
Sure. I don't have it right in front of me, but the third panel, you'll actually be able to see John Noble's face. He's on the panel. And we have a representative, actually the president or the chair, I should say, of the Environmental Advisory Council of the Bethlehem City Government. We have a professor from Lehigh. Her name is Karen Beck Pooley, who, can you tell us her field, Mary? Because I'm gonna stumble on it. She's in political science and environmental science. Is that correct?
The Environmental Initiative. And she's done a lot of projects that are about, sort of development and urban infrastructure that benefits sustainability and involves community engagement and around what kind of development we might be interested in. And one of Karen Bakouli's most recent project was the Parklet project, which I'm sure residents know about, putting parklets where parking spots had been, so there would be outdoor eating. So she'll be a wonderful panelist to talk about urban design.
And then our moderator is Brina, oh boy,
Holland.
Holland, thank you. And she's also a Lehigh professor and in political science and environmental science. And and of course, a representative from the Lehigh Valley Audubon Society. Our famous duo, Scott and Peter. Yeah, so I'm really excited about that. It will be a panel and it will be all about, you know, sort of furthering the discussion, including citizens, including our audience, in terms of really visioning how we can embrace these birds beyond the symbol of being the bird of Bethlehem, how we can, you know, grow up with them and make a future for them as well as for us in our city.
What a beautiful way to end, Jenny. What a beautiful sentiment. We really look forward to seeing you at the next panel. Please join us. And again, thank you so much for coming out to YouTube. And Christine, Peter, Scott, Josh, Jenny, you all are wonderful. Thank you for your leadership on the Save Our Swifts project. And I
Thank
hope
you, Mary. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Sure. Everyone, I hope you have a wonderful night.
Right.